Picture this. A respected military veteran stands in his own driveway, watching in disbelief as a tow truck hauls away his perfectly legally parked car while his HOA president smirks from across the street. But what the power-hungry president doesn't know is that every single lie, every fabricated violation, and every moment of his calculated harassment has been captured in crystal-clear 4K by multiple security cameras. Where are you watching from? Please feel free to leave a comment below, as you are about to witness the most satisfying takedown of an HOA tyrant you have ever seen. This isn't just another neighborhood dispute. This is the story of how one man's obsession with control led to his complete and utter public humiliation, captured frame by frame for the entire world to see. Meet David Chen, a 15-year Navy veteran who thought buying his dream home in Sunset Ridge Estates would finally give him the peaceful retirement he deserved. Instead, he found himself in the crosshairs of Roger Blackstone, an HOA president so drunk on power that he turned a quiet suburban street into his personal kingdom of petty tyranny. What started as minor complaints about David's lawn height would escalate into a year-long nightmare of fabricated violations, illegal fines, and harassment so outrageous that when the truth finally came to light, it would destroy not just Roger's reputation, but his entire life as he knew it. David Chen had earned his slice of the American dream the hard way. After 15 years of distinguished service in the Navy, including 2 deployments overseas, he used his VA benefits and life savings to purchase a beautiful colonial-style home at 1247 Maple Drive in Sunset Ridge Estates. The community seemed perfect. Manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and an HOA that promised to maintain property values and community standards. At 62, David was ready for peace. He spent his days tending to his small vegetable garden, reading on his front porch, and enjoying the quiet suburban life he'd dreamed about during those long nights on naval ships. His neighbors initially welcomed him with open arms, appreciating his military service and admiring the care he took with his property. But David's tranquil retirement would be shattered by one man's insatiable hunger for control. Roger Blackstone had been the HOA president of Sunset Ridge Estates for 8 years. In that time, he had transformed what was once a laid-back community into something resembling a militaristic regime. At 55, Roger was a mid-level insurance adjuster who had never achieved the success or recognition he believed he deserved in his professional life. The HOA presidency became his outlet for the power and authority that had eluded him elsewhere. Roger ruled with an iron fist disguised as community concern. He conducted daily patrol walks through the neighborhood, armed with a digital camera and a leather-bound notebook where he meticulously recorded every perceived violation. A trash can left out 30 minutes past collection time? That's a $50 fine. Flowers planted without pre-approval? $100 in mandatory removal? A car parked in your own driveway at the wrong angle? Don't even get him started. The other homeowners had learned to live in fear of Roger's scrutiny. Mrs. Patterson next door had stopped gardening altogether after receiving 17 fines for non-compliant plantings. The Johnsons, 3 houses down, installed blackout curtains because Roger once cited them for having their living room lights on past 11 p.m., claiming it violated the peaceful evening ambiance clause in the HOA bylaws. But if the neighbors thought Roger was strict before, his behavior would reach new levels of absurdity when David Chen moved in. Now here's where the story gets interesting, and if you're enjoying this wild ride, make sure you're subscribed because trust me, it only gets crazier from here. The first sign of trouble came just 3 weeks after David moved in. He had been working in his front yard, installing a small American flag holder next to his mailbox, a simple tribute to his years of service. As he knelt on his lawn, carefully measuring the placement, a shadow fell across his work. "Excuse me, but what do you think you're doing?" David looked up to see Roger Blackstone standing over him, clipboard in hand, wearing the kind of stern expression usually reserved for parents catching their teenager sneaking out past curfew. "Installing a flag holder. David replied, wiping dirt from his hands. "For the American flag." Roger's eyes narrowed as he consulted his clipboard. Article 7, Section 4 of our HOA covenants clearly states that the Architectural Review Committee must approve all exterior decorations before installation. That includes flagpoles, decorative elements, and— He paused dramatically. Military-themed displays. David felt his jaw tighten. After serving his country for 15 years, having some insurance adjuster tell him he needed permission to fly the American flag in his own yard felt like a slap in the face. But David was a military man. He understood chain of command, rules, and procedures. He would play by their game, at least for now. "Fine," David said, standing to his full height, which happened to be a good 4 inches taller than Roger. "Where do I submit the request?" Roger seemed momentarily rattled by David's calm compliance, as if he'd been hoping for a confrontation. "I'll email you the forms. The review process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks, provided all documentation is properly submitted. 6 weeks, to install an American flag in America." But David filled out the paperwork anyway, providing detailed measurements, material specifications, and even a color photograph of the exact flag holder he intended to install. He submitted everything through proper channels and waited, and waited, and waited. After 8 weeks with no response, David called the HOA office. Roger personally answered the phone. "Oh, Mr. Chen, yes, about your flag request. I'm afraid the committee found several deficiencies in your application. The flag holder you specified is 2 inches too tall according to our aesthetic guidelines, and frankly, some residents have expressed concern about the precedent of allowing military displays." David felt heat rising in his chest. "Precedent? It's an American flag. Be that as it may, our community values uniformity and peaceful aesthetics. I'm sure you understand. You'll need to resubmit with a compliant design." That night, David stood in his kitchen, staring at the forms spread across his table. His wife, Sarah, who had passed away 2 years earlier, used to joke that he was too patient for his own good. "One day, David," she'd say, "someone's going to mistake your kindness for weakness, and you're going to have to remind them why the Navy made you a chief petty officer." He could almost hear her voice now. The next morning, David made a decision that would change everything. If Roger wanted to play games, David would play, but he'd play by his own rules. David spent the weekend researching HOA law, property rights, and Virginia state regulations. What he discovered made his blood boil. Not only was Roger's demand for flag approval illegal under federal law, but half of the fines Roger had been issuing to other neighbors violated state HOA regulations. But before David made his move, he wanted to document everything. A lifetime of military training had taught him the value of evidence and preparation. He installed security cameras. Not just 1 or 2 cameras, David installed a comprehensive surveillance system with 6 4K cameras covering every angle of his property, front yard, backyard, driveway, and 2 covering the street in front of his house. Everything would be recorded in high definition with audio, stored on a secure server in his basement. Roger had no idea he was about to hand David all the evidence he would ever need. The war began exactly 3 days after David's cameras went live. It started with Roger's morning patrol, something David had observed but never truly understood the scope of until he could watch the footage. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Roger emerged from his house wearing what could only be described as a uniform. Khaki pants, a polo shirt with HOA President embroidered on the chest, and a utility belt containing his camera measuring tape clipboard and what appeared to be a citation pad. Roger's route was methodical. He walked the perimeter of each property, photographing anything that caught his attention, measuring distances with his tape, and making notes in his leather-bound book. But when he reached David's house, his behavior changed entirely. Where Roger spent perhaps 2 minutes at each of the other houses, he devoted nearly 20 minutes to David's property. The cameras captured him measuring the height of David's grass with a ruler, photographing David's mailbox from multiple angles, and even kneeling to examine the alignment of David's driveway pavement. But the most revealing footage showed Roger's reaction when he noticed the security cameras. The moment he spotted the first camera, his entire demeanor shifted. He looked around nervously, pulled out his phone, and made what appeared to be several quick calls. Then, in a move that would prove to be his biggest mistake, Roger walked directly up to one of the cameras and waved at it with an exaggerated smile, as if to say, "I know you're watching. Game on." That afternoon, David received his first official violation notice in the mail. The infraction? Unauthorized surveillance equipment installation without HOA approval. The fine? $500. David couldn't help but laugh as he read the notice. Roger was fining him for installing security cameras on his own property, cameras that were perfectly legal under both state and federal law. But Roger's legal ignorance would be his downfall, because David was recording everything. Now here's where Roger's obsession really starts to show, so stay tuned because you won't believe how far this man was willing to go to maintain his stranglehold on power. Over the next 2 weeks, David's cameras captured increasingly bizarre behavior from his HOA president. Roger began conducting not just his morning patrols, but afternoon patrols, evening patrols, and even late-night security checks. The man was spending upwards of 4 hours a day focused solely on David's property. The violations came fast and furious, each more ridiculous than the last. Grass height exceeds community standards by 0.3 inches, $50 fine. Mailbox positioned 1.2 inches outside acceptable placement zone, $75 fine. Driveway contains visible tire marks indicating non-compliant parking patterns, $100 fine. Exterior lighting creates glare that may disturb neighbors. This was for David's porch light, which was identical to every other porch light in the neighborhood. But the cameras revealed something even more damning. Roger was fabricating evidence. On Tuesday, October 15th at 2:47 p.m., David's cameras captured Roger walking onto David's property with a small bag. Roger looked around nervously, then proceeded to scatter what appeared to be candy wrappers and cigarette butts across David's front lawn. 2 hours later, David received a violation notice for failure to maintain litter-free premises, with photographic evidence of the very trash Roger had planted. On Friday, October 18th at 6:23 a.m., the cameras caught Roger using spray paint to mark David's driveway, creating fake oil stains. That afternoon's violation notice cited automotive fluid leaks creating unsanitary conditions. But Roger's masterpiece of deception came on Sunday, October 20th. David had installed a small decorative border around his flower bed using standard landscape stones available at any home improvement store. The border was tasteful, well installed, and identical to borders used by at least 6 other houses in the neighborhood. At 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, David's cameras recorded Roger approaching the house wearing dark clothing and carrying a bag of different colored stones. Working by the light of his cell phone, Roger carefully replaced several of David's gray landscape stones with bright orange ones, creating a jarring, mismatched appearance. Sunday's violation notice accused David of installing non-compliant decorative elements without architectural approval, creating visual disruption to community aesthetics. The fine was $300, and the notice demanded immediate removal of all landscape borders. David sat in his living room watching the footage on his laptop and felt something he hadn't experienced since his military days. The cold, calculating anger that comes when you realize someone has declared war on you. But Roger's campaign of harassment was about to escalate beyond property violations. The following week, David's cameras captured Roger conducting what could only be described as intelligence gathering. Roger was photographing David's visitors, writing down license plate numbers, and timing David's daily routines. When David's sister visited for dinner, Roger followed her car to the end of the street and took pictures of her license plate. When the postal worker delivered David's mail, Roger approached him afterward for what appeared to be an interrogation session. The psychological warfare intensified when Roger began filing noise complaints. According to the violation notices, David was creating excessive noise disturbances during quiet hours. The activities cited included running his garbage disposal at 7 a.m., 1 hour after the community's official quiet time ended, playing music in his backyard at excessive volumes during a Saturday afternoon barbecue. David's music was so quiet the cameras barely picked up the audio. Operating power tools during non-construction hours. David had used a cordless drill for exactly 4 minutes to hang a picture frame. Each violation came with increasingly hefty fines, and Roger's notices began including threats of legal action, property liens, and even potential foreclosure proceedings. But the cameras revealed the truth behind every single complaint. Roger was lying. On the morning Roger claimed David's garbage disposal created excessive noise, the camera audio showed David wasn't even home. His car was gone, his house was dark, and the only sound was Roger himself, standing outside David's kitchen window at 7 a.m. with a decibel meter, apparently measuring nothing but ambient neighborhood noise. The excessive music complaint was filed on a Saturday when David's cameras showed him quietly reading on his back porch with no music playing whatsoever. The power tool violation was perhaps the most outrageous. Roger's complaint claimed David had operated a circular saw for over an hour during prohibited hours. The cameras showed David using a cordless screwdriver for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds to install a small picture frame hanging kit inside his house. Now, if you think Roger's behavior couldn't get any more unhinged, buckle up, because we're just getting to the good part. The breaking point came when Roger decided to involve David's neighbors in his campaign of harassment. Using his position as HOA president, Roger sent official letters to every house on Maple Drive, informing them that David Chen was under investigation for multiple community violations, and encouraging residents to report any suspicious activities they observed. The letter, which David's sister photographed after receiving her own copy, painted David as a dangerous troublemaker who was undermining community safety and property values. It encouraged neighbors to document David's activities, report his visitors, and avoid unnecessary contact with him for their own safety. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Neighbors who had previously waved and smiled began crossing the street when they saw David. Mrs. Patterson, who used to chat with David about gardening, started hurrying inside whenever he appeared in his yard. The friendly community atmosphere David had hoped for in retirement was replaced by suspicious glances and uncomfortable silence. But Roger's character assassination campaign would backfire spectacularly because David's cameras were recording everything, including Roger's own behavior that would prove far more disturbing than anything he was accusing David of doing. The footage revealed that Roger was trespassing on David's property almost daily, going through David's mail, peering into David's windows, and even attempting to access David's backyard through the side gate. On multiple occasions, the cameras captured Roger trying door handles and testing whether David's garage door was locked. The most chilling footage showed Roger late at night, standing motionless in the street in front of David's house for extended periods, just watching. These surveillance sessions sometimes lasted over an hour, with Roger positioned strategically to avoid most street lighting while maintaining a clear view of David's home. David began sleeping with a baseball bat beside his bed. The confrontation that would end Roger Blackstone's reign of terror began on a quiet Tuesday morning in November, but the events that triggered it had been building for weeks. David had been documenting every violation, every fine, every instance of harassment, and he had consulted with an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. The evidence was overwhelming. Roger had violated dozens of state laws, federal regulations, and even the HOA's own governing documents in his obsessive campaign against David. But David wanted more than a legal victory. After months of psychological warfare, property destruction, and systematic harassment, David wanted complete and total exposure of Roger's corruption. The opportunity came when Roger made his most brazen power play yet. On Tuesday, November 12th, David woke to find a bright orange towing notice attached to his car windshield. According to the notice, his vehicle would be towed at 3 p.m. that day for violation of community parking regulations. The citation claimed David's car had been parked in an unauthorized location for more than 48 hours. David's car was parked in his own driveway, exactly where it had been parked every night for 6 months. David immediately called the towing company listed on the notice. The dispatcher explained that they had received an official request from the HOA president to tow the vehicle due to parking violations, and the tow had been authorized and paid for in advance. This was it. Roger had finally crossed the line from harassment into outright theft. David spent the morning making phone calls. He contacted his attorney, the local police department, and even reached out to an investigative reporter at the local news station who had been following HOA abuse stories. Everyone wanted to see how this played out. At 2:45 p.m., David positioned himself in his front yard with a perfect view of his driveway and his security cameras. He pretended to work on his garden while actually watching Roger's house across the street. Roger emerged at exactly 2:55 p.m., dressed in his unofficial HOA president uniform and carrying his clipboard. But this time, he was also carrying something else. A professional-grade camera with a telephoto lens, clearly intended to document the towing for his files. The tow truck arrived right on schedule at 3 p.m. What happened next was captured in stunning 4K detail by multiple camera angles, and it would become the most satisfying footage David had ever watched. The tow truck driver, a burly man named Mike who looked like he'd been in the business for decades, approached David's car with his equipment. But as a professional, Mike had learned to protect himself legally before performing any tow, especially in residential areas where disputes were common. "Excuse me," Mike called out to David. "Is this your vehicle?" "Yes, sir, it is." "I got a work order here that says it's illegally parked. You mind if I ask where you think it's supposed to be parked?" David smiled, knowing his cameras were recording every word. "Right where it is now, in my driveway, on my property." Mike frowned and pulled out his paperwork. "Says here it's been parked on HOA property for more than the allowed time." "I'm sorry, but that's completely false. This is my driveway, that's my house, and I own this property. I have the deed right inside if you'd like to see it." Now here's where Roger made the mistake that would destroy him, because he couldn't resist inserting himself into the confrontation. Roger came striding across the street, clipboard held high like a shield, his professional camera around his neck. "There's no problem here, driver. I'm Roger Blackstone, HOA president, and I authorize this tow. This vehicle has violated our parking regulations." Mike looked between David and Roger, clearly sensing something wasn't right. "What regulation exactly?" Roger consulted his clipboard with theatrical authority. "Article 12, Section 7 of our community covenants prohibits overnight parking in common areas. This vehicle has been parked on community property for over 48 hours. "But, sir," Mike said, looking around in confusion, "the car's in his driveway. That's private property." And this is where Roger told the lie that would end his career as HOA president and ultimately destroy his reputation forever. "No," Roger said with absolute confidence, pointing directly at David's driveway. "That driveway belongs to the HOA. All driveways in this community are common property maintained by the association. Residents only have parking privileges, not ownership rights." Mike scratched his head. "That doesn't sound right. I've never seen an HOA that owns residents' driveways." Roger doubled down, his voice rising with indignation. "I assure you I know our community regulations. I wrote half of them myself. That driveway is association property, and this man has violated our parking time limits." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Roger was now claiming that David didn't own his own driveway, a lie so outrageous that even Mike the tow truck driver looked skeptical. "Sir," David said calmly, "I have my property survey and deed inside. Would you like me to get them?" "That won't be necessary," Roger snapped. "The HOA has authority over all common areas, regardless of what some outdated property documents might say." Mike was clearly uncomfortable now. "Look, I don't want to get involved in any legal disputes. If there's a question about property ownership—" "There's no question," Roger interrupted. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority here." And that's when David played his ace card. "Mike," David said, reaching into his pocket, "before you make any decision, I think you should know that every word of this conversation has been recorded in high definition by multiple security cameras. If Mr. Blackstone is lying about property ownership to fraudulently authorize a tow of my vehicle from my own driveway, that's theft under Virginia state law." Roger's face went white. Mike looked up at the clearly visible security cameras, then back at Roger, then at David's driveway, which was obviously private property connected to David's house. "You know what?" Mike said, unhooking his equipment. "I think I need to see some documentation before I tow anything, either a court order or clear proof that the vehicle is actually on public property." Roger's voice cracked with desperation. "I'm ordering you to tow that vehicle. The HOA is paying you." "Not without proper documentation, you're not," Mike replied, climbing back into his truck. "Y'all figure out who owns what, then call me back." As the tow truck drove away, Roger stood alone in David's driveway, his authority shattered, his lies exposed, his face red with humiliation and rage. But David wasn't done yet. "Roger," David said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded Navy personnel, "I need you to get off my property. Now." "Your property?" Roger sputtered. "This is community property. You can't tell me where I can and cannot—" "Get off my property." The command was delivered with such calm intensity that Roger actually took a step backward. But his ego wouldn't let him retreat completely. "This isn't over, Chen. I have authorities I can call. I have connections. You have no idea who you're messing with." David smiled, the same smile he'd learned in the Navy when dealing with overly aggressive adversaries who had no idea how outmatched they were. "Roger," David said, "I have 6 months of high-definition video footage of you trespassing on my property, planting evidence, filing false reports, and attempting to steal my vehicle through fraudulent claims. I have documented every lie you've told, every violation you've fabricated, and every law you've broken." Roger's bluster died in his throat. "I also have records showing that you've been misappropriating HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including today's tow truck. That's embezzlement, Roger, a felony." The color drained from Roger's face completely. "So here's what's going to happen," David continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. "You're going to walk back to your house. You're going to draft your resignation as HOA president. And you're going to hope that when I turn all this evidence over to the authorities, they're feeling more generous than I am right now." Roger opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Oh, and Roger," David added, "stay off my property. Because next time you set foot on my land without permission, I won't be calling the police. I'll be exercising my rights under Virginia's Castle Doctrine." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Roger, finally understanding that he had lost completely, turned and walked back to his house without another word. But David's victory was beginning. The aftermath of Roger Blackstone's humiliation played out like dominoes falling in perfect sequence, each revelation more damaging than the last. Within hours of the towing incident, David had uploaded key footage to social media with the caption, "HOA president claims to own my driveway. You won't believe what happened next." The video went viral overnight, garnering over 100,000 views in its first 24 hours and sparking outrage across social media platforms. But the real devastation came when David's attorney released a comprehensive legal filing that detailed 6 months of documented harassment, property violations, and embezzlement. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Roger had filed 47 false violation reports against David alone, resulting in over $3,200 in fraudulent fines. The security camera footage proved that 43 of these violations were completely fabricated, with video evidence of Roger planting evidence, creating false damage, and lying about noise violations. The financial audit revealed that Roger had used his HOA president position to embezzle over $12,000 in community funds over the past 2 years. Money intended for landscaping maintenance had been used to pay for Roger's personal vehicle repairs. Funds designated for community improvements had been redirected to pay for Roger's home security system and professional camera equipment. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Roger had been selling private information about residents to local businesses, including personal schedules, vacation plans, and financial information gleaned from his position as HOA president. The legal consequences came swift and severe. The Virginia State Attorney General's office launched a criminal investigation into Roger's activities. The charges included embezzlement, harassment, filing false police reports, attempted theft, trespassing, and violation of privacy rights. Each charge carried potential jail time and substantial fines. The civil lawsuits followed immediately. David's attorney filed a comprehensive lawsuit seeking damages for harassment, defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The documented evidence made the case essentially airtight. But David wasn't the only victim seeking justice. Once word spread about Roger's systematic abuse of power, other residents came forward with their own stories of harassment and fraudulent violations. Mrs. Patterson revealed that she had paid over $1,800 in bogus fines over the past year rather than fight Roger's authority. The Johnsons disclosed that they had actually considered selling their home to escape Roger's constant harassment. A class action lawsuit was filed representing 23 homeowners who Roger's fraudulent violation schemes had victimized. The total damages claimed exceeded $50,000, not including punitive damages and attorney fees. Now here's where the story gets even more satisfying because Roger's downfall had consequences he never could have imagined. The media attention surrounding the case attracted investigative journalists from multiple outlets. A local news station ran a week-long series called HOA Abuse, When Power Goes Too Far, featuring Roger's story as the centerpiece. The coverage revealed that Roger's behavior wasn't unique. HOA abuse was a widespread problem affecting thousands of homeowners across the state. The story gained national attention when a major network picked up the footage of Roger claiming to own David's driveway. The absurdity of the situation, combined with the clear video evidence of Roger's lies, made it perfect content for social media and news commentary shows. Roger became a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. His red-faced denial that David owned his own driveway was turned into memes, reaction GIFs, and comedy sketches. Late-night talk show hosts used the footage as an example of petty tyrants drunk on insignificant power. The professional consequences for Roger were equally devastating. His employer, Mutual Benefits Insurance, conducted their own investigation after the criminal charges became public. They discovered that Roger had been using company time and resources to conduct his HOA harassment campaigns, including using his work computer to research residents' personal information. Roger was terminated immediately, losing not just his job but also his pension and benefits after 23 years with the company. No other insurance company would hire him with pending criminal charges and a viral reputation as an unethical power abuser. The financial impact was catastrophic. Legal defense costs, civil lawsuit settlements, and restitution payments consumed Roger's savings and forced him to sell his house. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who had tried to control property values through harassment ended up destroying his own property value through his criminal behavior. But the most satisfying consequence was the complete transformation of Sunset Ridge Estates itself. With Roger gone, the community experienced something it hadn't felt in years: peace. The new HOA board, elected by residents who were determined never to allow another Roger Blackstone to gain power, implemented strict oversight procedures and transparency requirements. The dozens of petty rules Roger had created to justify his harassment campaigns were immediately abolished. Residents were free to plant gardens, install reasonable decorations, and live normal lives without fear of arbitrary fines and violations. Property values, which Roger claimed he was protecting, actually increased after his removal. The negative publicity from his harassment campaigns had been deterring potential buyers, but the community's transformation into a genuinely friendly neighborhood attracted new residents. David Chen finally got the peaceful retirement he had earned through his military service. His neighbors, freed from Roger's reign of terror, returned to being friendly and welcoming. Mrs. Patterson resumed her gardening with enthusiasm, creating a beautiful flower garden that would have earned dozens of violations under Roger's rule. The American flag that had started the entire conflict was finally installed in David's front yard, with the full support and approval of the new HOA board. On Veterans Day, the entire neighborhood organized a ceremony honoring David's service, with many residents displaying their own flags in solidarity. David's security camera system, originally installed to defend against Roger's harassment, became a model for other HOA abuse victims. David began consulting with homeowners facing similar situations, helping them document violations and build legal cases against abusive HOA officials. The legal precedent set by David's case led to new state legislation strengthening homeowners' rights and imposing stricter oversight on HOA operations. The David Chen Act, as it became known informally, required HOA boards to provide clear evidence for all violations and prohibited the filing of fines without proper documentation and due process. Roger Blackstone's criminal trial took place 8 months after the driveway incident. The evidence was so overwhelming that his attorney recommended pleading guilty to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Roger was sentenced to 18 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and full restitution to his victims. During the sentencing hearing, the judge made a statement that perfectly captured the significance of the case. "Mr. Blackstone, you were entrusted with a position of minor authority in a residential community, and you used that authority to terrorize and harass your neighbors. Your behavior represents the worst kind of petty tyranny, and the damage you caused extends far beyond financial harm. You destroyed the sense of community and safety that homeowners have a right to expect." But the story doesn't end with Roger's imprisonment. 2 years after the incident, David received a letter from Roger, written from prison. In it, Roger expressed genuine remorse for his actions and acknowledged that his own insecurities had driven his behavior and need for control. He thanked David for exposing his corruption, saying that prison had given him time to reflect on how far he had fallen from the person he once thought he was. David never responded to the letter, but he kept it as a reminder that even the most difficult conflicts can lead to personal growth and positive change. Today, Sunset Ridge Estates is exactly what David had hoped for when he first moved in: a peaceful community where neighbors look out for each other without the fear of arbitrary harassment. The HOA operates transparently, focuses on genuine community improvements, and treats residents with respect and dignity. David still lives at 1247 Maple Drive, and his security cameras still record everything. But now they capture birthday parties, neighborhood barbecues, and children playing safely in the streets rather than evidence of harassment and abuse. The most important lesson from David Chen's victory over Roger Blackstone isn't about HOA disputes or property rights. It's about the power of documentation, persistence, and refusing to be intimidated by bullies, no matter what authority they claim to possess. Roger Blackstone thought he could use his position to destroy David Chen's peaceful retirement. Instead, his campaign of harassment led to his own complete and permanent downfall, while David emerged stronger and more respected than ever. Sometimes justice isn't just served, it's served with perfect clarity, captured in high-definition video and shared with the entire world. And that, as they say, is how you handle a tyrant. So the next time someone in a position of minor authority tries to abuse their power against you, remember David Chen's story. Document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the power of truth backed by overwhelming evidence. Because bullies like Roger Blackstone are counting on you being too intimidated to fight back. But as David proved, sometimes the best defense isn't just a good offense. It's a security camera system and the patience to let bullies destroy themselves with their own lies. What do you think about Roger's downfall? Have you ever dealt with an HOA tyrant like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served and bullies getting exactly what they deserve.